Welcome, everyone. Please let us know where you're joining from in the chat section. We are thrilled to have you with us today for a conversation on leadership, and we look forward to sharing some of the key leadership lessons from the book Lessons from Leaders. Lessons from Leaders is a diverse collection of candid stories from 15 remarkable leaders who share their insights, experiences, and the practical lessons we can all apply to shape our own leadership journeys. With that, I would like to introduce you to today's host, Sam Shriver. He's the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies, the author of From Coach to Coach and the 4 Moments of Truth, and the co-author of Lessons from Leaders. Welcome, Sam.
Susie, thank you very much. Thank you, Eric, for all the work that you're doing behind the scenes here. And on behalf of everybody at the Center for Leadership Studies, honored to be here. I know it will sound cliche, I get that, but I am so excited to have an hour to talk with our next leader, Patrick Stokes. I think you're going to find what he has to say practical, focused, and repeatable. And he, more than any other leader that we interviewed, is grooming the leaders of tomorrow. And we are humbled by the notion that we are in the chat room. I'm seeing people from every sector, of our country, and people from Ethiopia and the UK and India and Sweden and all over the world. So I am just very, very excited. And like I say, honored that you're in attendance. So appreciate it.
So as Sam mentioned, we have a very special guest with us today who is one of the extraordinary leaders that shares his story in the book. Patrick Stokes is a high school teacher and football coach who figured out what he wanted to do at just the age, or as just a teenager, and he has gone on to shape the lives of kids ever since. He is also a leader in Lessons from Leaders in his chapter, Setting the Tone. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Susie and Dr. Shriver. It's great to be here with you guys. I'm really excited about this opportunity. It's not only great for me, it's great for my students, and always looking for an opportunity to discuss and learn more of how to be a great leader. So thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, I'll tell you, Patrick, I, again, welcome. Thank you for contributing, to the book, and B, for this time that we're going to spend here today. I would like to start with something that Susie mentioned, because I got to tell you this, I always thought it was weird, even when you were telling me during the interview. You knew beyond a shadow of a doubt what you wanted to do with your life at the ripe old age of 15. And compared to a lot of other 15-year-olds who I'm sure have similar thoughts, mm-hmm. You actually saw that vision through. Like you became and still are exactly what you said you wanted to be at the age of 15. I'm wondering if you could just start by sharing a little bit about that moment, what led up to it, sort of any questions that you may have had about that decision kind of moving through, but just to kind of get us going there. I think that is that is a unique feature, in you as a leader.
Okay, sure. Well, and I won't rehash the whole story. It's on YouTube and it's available for those that want all the details. But basically, in summary, it was about this time of the year, and we were beginning football workouts for the incoming freshmen. And workouts were set to begin, I believe, at 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'm not sure the exact time. And I arrived late to the school because of a dental appointment that I had been scheduled long before that football meeting was to take place, right? Long before I knew about it anyway, as a 14-year-old. So I show up to the meeting, and the coach wouldn't let me in because I was just a couple of minutes late. He said, "You can sit in the hallway." But what I learned in that moment was the importance of arriving prepared, the importance of being punctual, the importance of pulling my weight as a member of this team, and that if I'm not in attendance, then there's a repercussion to the team as a whole. And so I sat and I waited in that hallway, and I was nervous as I could be, because this is, that old cliche, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. This is my first impression as a member of this new team. Not new for everyone else, but new for me as an incoming freshman, what they now call, right, first-year students. So I'm really nervous. But what I learned in that moment was leadership is sometimes difficult. Leadership is hard. And I don't believe the coach necessarily enjoyed having to sit me in the room and set me out in the hall and make me wait patiently. But he did what he had to do to put the team first. And so sometimes leadership is kind of difficult that way. But I also learned leadership also involves forgiveness and moving forward. And so once that moment was done and I said I was sorry and he told me why I was wrong and how I could do better next time, arriving early, I went and I did some penalty runs as a nice reminder. And then we went we went about our business and I was a part of the team. And so sacrifice is important to be a part of the team. And maybe that's sacrificing personal time or sacrificing this or that, but punctuality, sacrifice, commitment, overcoming those difficult moments. That was just an hour of my life, but it was really formidable, to be honest. And moving forward, I knew that I wanted to be somebody like that. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to work to inspire young people, and not just all young people, to be very clear. I have so much admiration for elementary school and middle school teachers, but personally, I like ages 14 through 18. I'm geared toward the high school age. That's where I best fit. And I really enjoy it. Not to jump to future questions that we're going to get into here, but having a purpose and being driven to achieve that purpose, right, I guess is what you're getting at here. I knew I wanted to teach, and I knew I wanted to impact the lives of young people. I really didn't know what subject I wanted to teach. I didn't even fully know what sport I wanted to coach because I was a multi-sport athlete growing up. But I knew I wanted to be a part of that important dynamic and a part of that community, fostering young people for the next generation. I didn't know how to do it. I had to go off to college to learn how to do it. And much like most jobs, you learn very little in college about how to do, but more so in college, you learn how to prepare yourself for that moment. And for the past 17 years now, I've been able to continue to learn how to best impact young people. And that's pretty much that in a nutshell.
I'm more blown away now with that explanation than I was when I got it the first time or wrote about it in the book. It is so powerful. And speaking as a parent of 3 who went through the ages of 14 to 18, like freshman to senior year, I think there's a lot of parents, myself included, that might just want to avoid those years altogether. Because by the way, that was LinkedIn Live humor there, for what it's worth. But just when you think about, and we are going to talk about this quite a bit, the change that takes place from an incoming freshman, to a senior, like the things they have the opportunity to learn or not learn, the sort of the whole maturation process that takes place during that 4 years is unreal. And the other thing is that you were talking just about in every one of these sessions, we refer in one way or another to Alan Mulally, but I remember him talking with passion about one of the rules that he had at Boeing and at Ford as a senior leader, and it was no tolerance for bad behavior. So if somebody did something they weren't supposed to do, he was going to address it. The team was going to address it. And because of the consequences with, of the team, on the outcomes, all those different kinds of things. But it really is amazing how much most of us learn, one way or another, from that discipline equitably employed. So in that regard, thank you very much. And speaking of Alan Mulally, I'm assuming you've read other chapters in the book, and if you haven't, shame on you. But so what other messages resonated with you, and why, if you don't mind? So you are a high school teacher and football coach,
right?
And there's some pretty high-profile people in all different walks of life that we were honored to have the opportunity to interview. But as you read through there, what messages, from 2 or 3 of the leaders, did you find yourself going, I got to remember this? This is a good one. This is something I'd like to pass along.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And in fact, as you were talking about some of the other things leading in on the question, I was going back to the book and to the chapters. And first, let me say this. When you first sent me the finished copy of the book, I thought you sent the wrong book. because I'm looking through the table of contents here, and I'm seeing all these names. This is, I'm surely I'm in a later volume, right? And I kept looking, and I'm like, wow, well, there's my name. And then, the saddest thing, I started telling people about it. They didn't believe me. So my principal, he said, I'd like to get a copy of that, wink, wink. And what do you mean? You said a couple extra copies. So I gave him one, and he was supposed to read it over Christmas. I haven't gotten it back yet. So perhaps he's studying it. maybe he's tuning in right now. But with all seriousness, when you were speaking a moment ago about the ages of 14 to 18 with the LinkedIn humor, that sometimes it should be easier to skip all that. That's exactly what Dr. Kim was talking about in his chapter on being humble in identifying leadership and not tapping into our stereotypes that are commonly, expected from our age or our background or whatnot, our experiences, but to look at people where they are and what can they bring to the table? What can they add to the team? Because we all have these values. We all have these talents and strengths and gifts. And Dr. Kim talked about that in the book pretty extensively. And interestingly enough, I learned of Dr. Kim when I'm bored, like for instance, seriously though, I administer the ACT and the SAT sometimes on the weekends, and in between little sessions, we'll have time to ourselves. I like to look at commencement speeches and things like that, examples of leadership. Well, I looked at one from 2011, and it was at Dartmouth College, and Conan O'Brien is doing the speech, but Dr. Kim is over here, and he is laughing at every joke that Conan O'Brien throws out. My point in saying all this, we need to be humble, and we need to take people for what they are and try to develop them and foster them and grow them, of course, but young people bring a lot to it. And what's more important anyway than us just being humble is helping young people identify their core values. And the chapter on Nancy Singer, she talks about those core values. And core values will differ from person to person. I think it's important to be able to identify the core values. For me, my four are responsibility, respect, humility, and perseverance. Those are the four core values. And so my mission statement as a teacher and a coach, my vision for young people to engage and empower, all goes back to the core values. And they're true both on the field for my players, they're true in the classroom for my students. And so anytime there's an issue, anytime there's a problem, one of the greatest questions that principals always want to ask, how do you handle discipline, or how do you motivate the unmotivated, or how do you redirect behavior? You go back to the core values. So having humility, leaning on the core values, and sometimes too, not to recount the whole book, because if I keep doing this, people aren't going to buy the book, but Mr. Mullally, right? He talks about the green, yellow, and red light plan. I think that's phenomenal. And I had heard many of the other things that were in the book. That's one I had not heard. I loved it, and I want to learn more about it. But the green light, the yellow light, and the red light, and especially when you're dealing with leadership teams, perhaps one day I'll be in a situation where I am more responsible for the, just small groups of students or players, but more so of an all-encompassing leadership team dynamic. And I'll be able to employ some of that green, yellow, and red. There's a question that I hope we'll get to later on about how has this remote learning and virtual world that we're now living in, how has it changed instructing in the modern era? And I'll come back and talk a little bit about breakout rooms. And that's a place I believe that I can utilize the green, yellow, and red model.
Yeah. Well, we will get that. And don't be jumping ahead. That's my job. I'm sort of the interview guy here. Okay. No, but I will say, and I think you'd be interested in this, and I don't know if it came out in the chapter just off the top of my head, but Dr. Jim Kim, if you take a look at him as one of those high school students, like when he was 14, 15, 16, 17, he immigrated from Korea to a town someplace in Iowa, wound up, in addition to being a great student, he was the quarterback on the football team. He was the point guard on the basketball team. He was the shortstop on the baseball team. Went to Harvard, got 2 doctorates, because as I've said before, like, why get one when you can just go ahead and get 2? But he got 2 and he's had probably more impact on the world, HIV, COVID, like that kind of impact. But I think employing very simple principles. Santiago, who wrote the foreword to the book, said, and I think this is just such a great perspective. With leadership, you got to work through the complexity to get to the simplicity. And the thing about that is just like your message as a parent, as a coach, as a teacher, as a leader, it's got to be simple so that people can embrace it and act upon it. And I think, like, what are you doing in this book with all you're doing each and every day stuff they marvel at, because what you're doing is you're shaping, at least from my perspective, you're shaping all kinds of kids that are going to go out into the world and have the opportunity to lead others and become good citizens and so on and so forth. Speaking of which, tell me about kids today, like the leadership qualities that you see in school right now. And it's got to be something, because like every year you lose a class and gain a class, right? Like every year you're kind of at the end of graduation and you're saying goodbye to people that are going to hopefully come back and stay in touch. And then here comes raw clay. They're walking through the door as well. So tell me about some of the qualities that you see in this day and age with all of the complexity of life that is out there for all of us, let alone for kids that are like 14 to 18. What are some of the qualities that you see consistently from people that, for whatever reason, become leaders in your student body?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. Thanks for, and I'm going to target that toward what you just talked about in terms of how they become leaders in the student body. I'll also say this: I've got a unique perspective right now because my son just graduated from high school and he's planning to matriculate to Washington and Lee University in Western Virginia here in the fall. So going through it as a parent is different than I did the last time that we had interviewed. And of course I had some stories, but I've been able to witness it firsthand and help foster his development. So for those of you that are parents in the audience, I'm not going to necessarily say take some notes, but I've experienced it. And there's some things that I do a little differently now, right? I do differently, and I'll make sure to do them differently moving forward as a teacher, because it's just different. So anyway, back to what I think the qualities. Young people have always been energetic. I'm older. I get tired. Sometimes I get weary. I get worn down. It's hard to pick yourself up and continuing to overcome. But young people are resilient, and they always have been. This isn't a new quality now. They've been youthful. They've been resilient. They're determined. Those are all great leadership qualities. But there's one that young people have now more than they've ever had. And some people don't really like it because it challenges cultural norms and expectations and social mores and perhaps teachings of the past. But young people are critical thinkers more than they ever have. As a historian, I mean, we can look through unique times in American history and the history of the world and see challenges to those culturally expected things. But right now we're living in a big time of change. We really are. And I mean, we're always in a time of change, right? But seriously, these young people now, at least here in America, are really thinking deeply and critically about not just how they feel about particular things, but what they want to do about particular things. And so feeling and doing, they're more connected. And I think social media has done that more than anything else, certainly more than teachers or parents or leaders in the community. Social media has really connected people, which leads me to two things that I think it's very important that as an educator, I've got to be cognizant of in helping guide kids. One, it's important that young people separate misinformation from truth. And that's part of critical thinking, but you can't just accept everything that you hear. You need to challenge it, think about it, figure out what your stance is on it. But also what young people are lacking more that we used to do a much better job of is fostering public speaking because of things like social media and this world that we're living in. Getting up in front of a group of people and having a conversation or having a discussion. And it doesn't have to just be speech giving. It could simply be classroom conversations. Many young people are struggling in this area because we've relied so heavily upon technology to do the discourse for us, they've lost that ability to get back to the number one articulation of human existence, which is oral. So to summarize all that, I think young people are wonderful, but we do need to make sure that we're not losing the same qualities of leadership that made earlier generations successful, but rather we're building on them moving forward.
Yeah, no, great answer. And there's just probably 64 sub questions that come from that. But one in particular, I think it was Brett Williams in the book, the retired general that's the cybersecurity expert. Mm-hmm. But he said, like, leadership is vague. Leadership's a mess. It's and I would think with young kids who, of course, have a smartphone that may every now and then act very dumb, mm-hmm. but they get information. It's coming in, right? Mm-hmm. And you are we're long removed from the time when you can say to people, because I said so, right?
Absolutely.
I didn't like that. I didn't like that answer when I got it as a kid 100 years ago. And now it's just like nobody would ever go there. But information, it's all over the place. Mm-hmm. And you can choose to, what I hear you saying, you can choose to kind of ignore the fact that these kids have opinions that are the product of the information that they're taking in. You can just choose to ignore that and say, well, here's what you're going to do. That's wrong. Or you can dive in with them and really sort of from a due diligence standpoint say, let's think about that. Let's work that through. Does that make sense? What is your source? Where are you coming from? All of that sort of thing, because just because you read it on your phone doesn't make it so. Okay. Right. I mean, so I hear you saying that in particular. And the other thing is just what we're doing now, just having a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not used to articulating or talking or somewhere, leaders do that, right? They're not just texting people or coming up with like some sort of an instant message. Right. They have the ability either virtually, or live to connect. Is there anything that you do personally on your own or the curriculum at your school to help foster that sort of either one-on-one or in class, kind of articulation of messages?
Absolutely. So I'll take it in two areas. One, we'll look at it athletically first. And one of the issues that we've had as we've moved on, either as our staff has gotten older and we're less in touch with the youth of America, perhaps. But one of the common complaints I would always hear from coaches on our staff was that our players don't know how to be leaders. We don't have enough leaders. We don't this, we don't. So rather than complaining about it, and when they show up, okay, the first day of practice, they don't know how to throw a football. They don't know how to block or tackle or long snap or take off on kickoff team. They don't know how to do these things, so we teach them, right? And if we're struggling to figure out a way to teach them, then we go and professionally develop ourselves to grow in the profession so we can find different ways to teach them. Why are we not doing this in the realm of leadership? So let's not just complain about it. Let's act on it. Let's do something about it. So 2 years ago, I initiated a leadership boot camp, which consisted of varsity players only. It was a bit of a pilot program, and I would bring in some members of the local community, some pastors, some doctors, some retired educators from a different, variety of backgrounds, and they would share in these conversations with us. But the conversations, once again, were always centered around those 4 core values. And what I learned, it was amazing. Students just wanted to share what was on their heart. These players, they had heard the words, and they knew what they meant, but they didn't really know how to live them. And so what we started to do was I would challenge them weekly. We would say, today we're going to talk about perseverance. And now these players were from a variety of backgrounds, from wealthy families and great athletes to not so great athletes. And one for a duration of our time together, he was technically homeless. And so they're coming from a variety of backgrounds here. In fact, that young man sometimes would have to miss our meetings because he worked a part-time job after practice to help his mom pay the bills once they finally did get a place. So to hear him talk about perseverance was very different than to hear did they hear the all-star quarterback talking about perseverance on 4th down? But yet those principles, they're the same. They really are, because you've got a moment, it's a challenge, and I've got to overcome it. But what I learned, just give them a little bit and let them start thinking about it. Of course, we always involved food because young people love to eat, especially young athletes after practice. We had sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And I think we ended up with 12 total. We had 6 seniors, 4 juniors, and 2 sophomores, and it was a pilot. And then COVID hit, and we had to we couldn't meet inside. We couldn't meet and discuss. We could barely meet and practice. And so these things, we had some challenges there. But I look forward to the fall to implement the program again with a second generation of kids coming along. And it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But that's one of the things that we're doing on the football team to foster and develop leadership. But in the classroom, you talk about encouraging kids to think for themselves and to become those independent leaders. When I first started teaching, I taught more content than anything else. I felt like it's really important that kids understand the Compromise of 1877 and the impact it had leading into the Gilded Age. Okay, you can Google that, right? And it is important that we talk about it. But why is that? Well, there's 3 areas of skill development: compare and contrast. In our lives as leaders, as thinkers about history, as thinkers about whatever it is we're going to have for dinner, you got to create comparisons and contrast. Analytical thinking. We also look at change and continuity over time, as well as cause and effect. So studying history through the lens of those 3 areas of critical thinking really helps students begin to see why I'm learning this matters, but how will it apply to me as a young person now and in my adult life? Also, this thing that we do called synthesis, where we'll take a thematic level of understanding and something that happened here. I'll give you an example. I was referencing the Gilded Age. So in the Gilded Age, we had this laissez-faire, hands-off attitude, and it was a pro-business approach. We're going to see the same thing manifest again in the 1920s in America. And then even President Trump did some things to create that again, right, coming after the 2016 election. And so when kids started to see, so this isn't the first time that we've been down this path, or this, now they're understanding things that will empower them. And once again, my mission statement based on the core values is to engage and empower young people to be better learners and responsible members of the community. So if we can do those things, purposefully instruct and empower them to go off, that's what leadership's all about. But giving them the platform to fail, giving them the platform to reflect, giving them the time to think and discuss. And COVID has certainly been challenging with that. And I've had to reflect myself on how I can still communicate all these things in a virtual world. It's been challenging. It really has, because students, one thing that they're not, and notice I didn't mention this, they're not highly motivated to learn difficult things. They are a lot of things, but they're not highly motivated to learn difficult things, not at a young age. It's too easy to say, I'm just not interested. That curiosity hasn't really flipped yet. So it's been challenging for me, and I don't know that I've fully faced it head on, but we're still working on it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I don't know if you're checking out the chat room coming up here, but Rahendra and some others, it's just like, if you're connecting learning to leadership, Ann Herman Denis talked about that in the book and on our LinkedIn. It's like you can't do one without the other, right? Like leaders, and you said it in different terms, but show me a leader, I'll show you a thoughtful person. There's somebody that has looked at a circumstance, identified a task in the world of situational leadership, but they've really sort of zeroed in on what are we trying to do here, and who are the people that are trying to do it,
right?
And how can I become the straw that stirs that drink to get it going? Like, what do I have to do to adjust to sort of help people learn and help them become, self-sufficient? And the other thing, it's a great question, and we get it all the time. And obviously we do a lot of work at the Center for Leadership Studies in corporate settings, when do you teach leadership? When should it become something that an organization or a school system invests in, right? And you make a strong argument. Marshall Goldsmith, one of the co-authors of the main author of the book, the lead guy, it's sort of like you ought to be teaching these concepts like in grade school, I mean, just the whole idea of influence, what it is, how you influence others, how you feel when you have like a style match versus a mismatch. There's different language that you take on there, and there's a different level of sophistication as you move on.
Right.
But it's really the same kind of fundamentals you learn that first day of practice, whether you're blocking or tackling or doing whatever you're doing on a football field. So as many of the people in the chat have done from around the world, congrats to you, congrats to the people at your school for sort of taking the initiative to give kids a forum to really investigate and talk about what this is and what this isn't. To your virtual comments, and we're finally here. We're finally to the point where I started asking you some direct questions about COVID and the impact on school and all of that sort of thing. But that must have been, it was for so many people globally in so many different ways. But boy, if you're in the business of teaching school, I mean, the virtual option, it's an option. How good of option was it? Okay. And
yeah,
the basis of last year, what do you see as the role of virtual learning with high school kids, 14 to 18, moving forward? If we return back to air quotes normal, what did we learn that's positive? Like, where might that medium help us? And where and what kind of a role will in-person classroom training take moving forward after we've learned all those things that we had to learn because of COVID?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to break it down into two different areas. So in finishing out the 2019-2020 school year, I had already had an opportunity from August until, I guess, February, March, whenever that was, to develop the relationship with the young person. And so first, I think it's first in any engagement is to develop a relationship. To who am I? Who are you? How are we in this together? What are our common objectives? And so we had all that time together. So when we finished up the remainder of the 2020 school year, we used virtual learning to our advantage. It was wonderful because the kids trusted me, I trusted them, they tuned in, they turned in work, and not all students participated equally. But the participation was at a really high level, and kids felt comfortable with me and they felt comfortable with each other. That's really important too. Kids in a classroom really need to feel comfort around one another. And every school year I do some things to initiate and get to know each other, because just because they're in the same class doesn't mean that they know, or if you'll take college, for instance, if you're going to work together and you're coming from all different walks of life, it's really important to understand who your team is. And so I think that's really critical. And we had gone through all those steps. So to finish out the school year, my students performed phenomenally on the advanced placement U.S. history exam, which is this international exam they take to see how well how proficient they are. 80% of them got college credit for this course. So it was wonderful. Now, fast forward until August 2020. Now I'm developing relationships via Zoom is the medium that we used. And it was really challenging. It was extremely difficult. And I tried breakout rooms. I tried one-on-one meetings. I tried so many things to get these kids involved. But what I learned is, number one, they just want me to give them the information and sign off, right? They're not really interested in engaging in dialogue. They're just ready to move along, regardless of what it was, to be honest. Two, the policy in the professional world, you wouldn't have this issue. But because of students and sensitivities and backgrounds, we weren't allowed to mandate that their cameras be turned on. And so you could imagine an unmotivated 16, 17-year-old, they're in attendance, if we would have used the air quotes, but are they really there? Or is it just a white lettered name across a black screen? And so I'm talking, and they're there. The same people would always answer the questions. And so in a room of 30 enrollees, only 20 are in attendance, 5 are answering all the questions. And so you're wondering, how much learning is really going on here? And so you try the breakout room. Let's put them in the breakout rooms and let's give them some questions and let's assign jobs. But then you're what you're actually doing as an educator. I learned I was hindering the growth of those who really did want to learn, because I was trying to engage and tap into those who didn't want to learn. And it was a mess, to be honest. It wasn't great. We got through it. The AP scores won't come out until July, but I don't think it's going to be an 80% proficiency score, which is disappointing. But I will tell you this. One of the greatest qualities that came out of it was when students would need help, I would schedule after hours times, and it may be at 7 at night, 8 at night. I would schedule it around their schedules and mine as well, obviously. And we could have one-on-one conversations and writers' workshops, and I could share the screen and show them their documents and what they were doing great and what they weren't. And honestly, some kids really did well with that, because if a young person rides the bus to school and from school, they can't stay after school to get extra help. So they just don't get it. I'm not going to have a phone conversation, but Zoom videos I would record. And so those were all saved, and they were, of course, approved safe by the school system. But that was a great opportunity to remotely help students. And so those who took advantage of it, I think, really had a chance to grow. And so our school system is actually giving the opportunity for a virtual academy for those that want to continue learning in that environment. The school system has created that avenue for them. And I think that's wonderful. And there's things that are outside of our control, whether it be hospitalizations, or one of the young ladies ended up moving to Dallas, Texas in the middle of the semester. It wasn't a bona fide move where she had a change of residence, but because of some family situations, she had to move to Dallas. So I'm teaching her in Dallas, Texas. Another young lady was in California for a month visiting family. So those are things that we couldn't have done if we were in person. So although there were some strengths, there were some drawbacks, but I'm not going to say that we're better for it, but we certainly, if we'll utilize our creativity, some positives can come of it. And I'm excited to see where it takes us next.
Yeah, I got to tell you, and I certainly do not speak for any of the hundreds of people that are on our broadcast here, but that may be as good an explanation of the high side and the downside of a truly unmanageable situation that I have heard. So I sincerely, thank you for that. I also, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about your term resilience. Mm-hmm. The kids, by their very nature, they're resilient. They can put up with a lot of different things. And but the other thing is, when you start to think about the growth and development of kids in particular at that age, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough thing. Mm-hmm. To virtually learn, like whatever it happens to be. And if you're not just really a self-started, motivated kind of person, there's a lot you can do to kind of get away with, checking the box and
right.
Yeah, no doubt, no question. You teach history.
Yes,
I got a content question here. Is teaching history, how is teaching history today different, if at all, from teaching history 10 years ago? Just from the content and a lot of the things that you hear in the media, all of the, the different curriculum challenges and various things. How is teaching history different, if it is, from what you've been doing throughout your career as a history teacher?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm constantly reflecting upon that to be better at my trade today and tomorrow than I was yesterday, by seeking professional developments and reflecting and talking to colleagues. But the biggest thing I would say was years ago, and it was because, honestly, it was the way I was taught. It was, how much information can we receive? How much information as a teacher can I pass out? And so a couple of little analogies here, right? It's kind of like taking the spaghetti and throwing it against the wall and just seeing what sticks, and you hope for the best. Well, hope is a terrible plan, right? Hope is a terrible strategy. Hope is wonderful to have. It's all important, but it's not a plan moving forward. And so I hope that they get it. No, that's not very good. So fortunately, the state objectives and things here in North Carolina and our local policies, as well as the advanced placement curriculum nationwide, has really gone more to a skill-based model as opposed to a content. Because as I mentioned earlier, content can be Googled, research can be done. I mean, we've got so much information just at our fingertips. What we don't have is that that we're not naturally born to think critically and to challenge. You mentioned to analyze bias. Okay, so we look at analyzing bias. We look at primary sources through history, but I want students not just to understand the context of the document, whether it be a primary source, political cartoon, or a photograph, or a diary entry. Who is the intended audience? What is the author's purpose? Okay, what is a perspective nuance that would challenge this style of thinking? Those are skills that students can use, whether they're reading today's issue of the Wall Street Journal or they're reading the Wall Street Journal from 100 years ago. It doesn't matter. And so history is just how I teach these skills and concepts. Now, likewise, these skills and concepts should also be taught and are being taught in English and physical education, even. You name the subject, okay, whether it's an extracurricular or a co-curricular course. So thankfully, and I am thankful for this, the way public education is going now is we're developing thinkers and learners, not just people who can regurgitate worthless information just for the sake of saying that I know this, because that knowing these things, Ken Jennings, benefited from it on Jeopardy, but the rest of us just won't. And that's just the fact of the matter. So,
yeah, I think it is refreshing. And I forget the professor I had. I think I was someplace in college where he said, the thing, and I didn't think about it much at the time, but he says, the thing you have to remember about history is that it's his story.
Mm-hmm.
And so just because you're getting a perspective doesn't necessarily mean that perspective should go unchallenged, or, now we've got new information. And as the ground we've already covered, students are asking questions that they weren't asking before they had access to all of the information that they have access to.
Right.
Now, I'd like to pass this next question off as one of my own, because I think it's a really good question, but it actually comes in the chat from Maggie Shipley. It's sort of like back to the whole idea of here we come back into the classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you foresee, what are some of the challenges associated with that? From your perspective. So now we've had this year off. Now we've got students that are coming back to something. What are some of the challenges with that, kind of re-entry, if you will, and how are you and other members of the faculty, preparing for that?
That's a wonderful question, and it's something that we're talking about specifically weekly throughout the summer, and that's what we're spending our time doing, is preparing for the return of students, both the students and athletes. So, and I mentioned athletics because athletic participation was down. Typically, our team between the junior varsity and varsity will have 110 to 120 players. This past year, we only had 80, and it was a variety of reasons. But bottom line, students need to feel welcomed. They need to be encouraged. And they need to feel like school is a place that they belong, not because they have to be there, but because they want to be there. So that is to say, successful businesses do just that. They sell themselves, and successful people are successful because others want to be around them. And so, or they've got something to offer. So our school, and in my classroom specifically, it needs to be a place that's welcoming, and it needs to be a place where students want to be. Not because I want them to be there or their parents or anybody else, but because there's something there they're coming for. And there's an old expression I heard from a coach several years ago, and a player said, "Coach, I just couldn't make it to practice. I didn't have a ride." And the coach looked at him and he said, "I bet if there was a lottery ticket with your name on it for $1 million, you'd have found a way to get here." And the player looked at him and said, "Of course I would." Well, what is the message? You got to have something that they want. You got to have something that brings them to it. So, Maggie, I guess we've done some deep thinking, and we're in the early stages of this here in June. We just got out. And it's kind of like we just finished teaching the election of 2020. Now it's time to go back to talking about Indigenous Americans. And it's like, let me catch my breath. But we are in the beginning stages of this. In fact, throughout this week, I'm involved in an initiative where we're creating an advisory period. And we're going through, and there's a 30-minute enrichment period each day. And we are actively having conversations and conducting our own research. What is it going to look like coming back? And I don't have all the answers, but I do know it needs to be loving and supportive and respecting too. And it's important. So we've not been in school really in big numbers, since a lot of the cultural challenges that we're facing here in America right now, dating back to the spring of 2020. So those are also issues that we've really, the elephant in the room, and we've got to address this, and we can't just ignore it because, I'm not going to call it an issue, but situations aren't going to just go away because you ignore them. That's not what leadership's all about. So let's have an active approach, and students need to be a part of this conversation because it's not just us as teachers. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, whether it's students, parents, business members in the community. This is our school community. And so we need to get as many stakeholders involved in these conversations as we can. But Maggie, that's a great question. I have more ideas than I do answers right now. Maybe I'll come back at the end of the next school year and tell you how it went.
Yeah, we'll do a follow up here. Yeah, I also just wanted to, and I would think this would be the thing that either got you excited about your job or that you just wanted to run from. But the comment that I think I would say Langdon, the comment up there about the whole idea of history in particular being written by winners. It's got to be like almost like a you have to look at it as a refreshing environment where okay, so a lot of stuff on the table here that we were sort of viewing as being very well established for an extended period of time. So now let's talk about that. Let's discuss it. Let's bring questions and let's engage in some kind of in Peter Senge's word, productive dialogue about what that means, how that impacts you, moving forward. In that context, tell me a little bit, as we sort of get to the point, unfortunately, where we have to, sign off here. A couple more questions. Like, what are the leaders of the future going to be like? On the basis of just, kind of that question about there's a lot of stuff that's on the table now that we're discussing, which is good and exciting, that maybe we haven't discussed enough, historically. A lot of those kinds of conversations going, but tell us about the leaders of the future on the basis of kind of your direct observations. Should we be relieved or scared to death? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I don't think we should be scared to death at all, and I don't know that we should be relieved because I guess what I'll say is I'm inspired every day. I go, and it's not really a job. It's what I do. It's who I am. I go and I engage with several hundred young people who are thoughtful. They're considerate, most of them. Here's what we need to remember too. Young people haven't been downtrodden. Young people oftentimes they're not 100% solid in their way of thinking. You can engage in conversations with them. Now, I said earlier that some of them struggle with public speaking and we do need to work with that, but you can converse with them and they may feel one way today and 6 months later feel something totally different. And I think that's okay as long as it's rooted in true belief and in fact, and they're working to develop a better level of understanding. And I'll be frank with you, as long as it doesn't harm anybody else and it offers respect for each other, I don't really care what they think. I mean, I do care what they think, but they have the freedom to make their own decisions. And part of that sometimes is failing. One of the things I learned actually from the Washington Elite coach when we were on our visit with my son, he's going to play football there. And he is excited about the Shenandoah Valley. Somebody had mentioned that in the chat earlier. He really is. It was beautiful. We were up there Memorial Day weekend. But the coach said, I'm never going to tell you what you should do. He said, this isn't a place where I have to micromanage students. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm not. It's your job to figure out the best possible solution for you. I'll simply help you discover what those options are, because helping you grow. And I took something from that. I've been in this profession for almost 2 decades, but when he said that, just the way he said it was really, really, really profound to me. And I think that's what my charge has to be with young people. So I am hopeful, but I'm also hopeful that educators, we're becoming better at our craft and trade than we ever have been. There's this thing, and I don't want to copyright anything, but there's these things called SMART goals, right? It needs to be strategic, measurable, attainable, relative, and time bound.
Right.
And we need to target these SMART goals as we move forward to help grow new leaders. So I'm absolutely inspired by this generation. And I'm excited to see what they do. I'm hoping they can solve some of the problems that my generation has been unable to solve.
Yeah, mine as well. To that point, I think Douglas asked a good question. It's sort of like, the leaders of the future, are they going to be more concerned about people, or are they going to be continue to be more concerned about product? And what I hear you saying is, a lot of these like goals that we have that are associated with, let's get this objective done by this point in time to this level of quality.
Right.
But a lot of that needs to start being more and more applied to the people side of things, the impact side of things, the respect side of things, all of that kind of stuff. I regret this, but final question, and this will not play to your strength. What do you consider to be your greatest success as a leader? If you had to say, and I remember when I interviewed you for the book, I think you said, I asked you, like, how many kids do you think you've impacted? And you kind of said for 1,000, 1,200, some kind of, there was some, you were kind of doing math about all the years.
Right.
But if I had to ask you, final question, what would you consider to be your greatest success as a leader in the capacity in which you serve?
So I'm going to break it up quick, and I'll go through this quickly because I know time is of the essence. Personally, on a personal level, my children have been my greatest success. That my kids have done great things, and I've seen them emulate many of the leadership qualities, both in the relationships that I have with them, but also in the relationships that they have with their peers. And I'm just really, really, really proud of them. And that wasn't by chance. That was purposeful. That was intentional. And I'm very thankful for that personally. Professionally, it's the same thing. And it ties exactly in with Douglas's question about is the people or the product. For me, the product is people. It is. And I don't want to, I'm not creating a product. I'm creating people. I'm helping grow people. I'm helping see young people develop, and to empower kids to go off, and they're children when I get them, right? To go off and become young, successful adults who have now gone on to become doctors and lawyers and business executives and nurses and other teachers and leaders in their church community or their faith-based communities. It is amazing to watch and sit back and see what they do. I'm going to tell you this on a joking note. Now, this is the joke, and all jokes aside, though, it's kind of serious. I've got several thousand Facebook followers, or not followers, but friends, I guess we say. And that's a way I keep in touch with a lot of my former students. And I like to comment. I'm not on there often, but I do like to comment when I see something here or there. So many of them are so much more educated than I am, and it hurts my feelings because they've got degrees coming left and right. And, I just got my second PhD, and I'm thinking, wow, boy, did I miss it, but I'm so proud of them, right? And I feel like in a small way, and I've been around some great teachers, and I work with some wonderful people. I'm just thankful to be a small part of their journey. I really am.
Well, and I'll tell you, I imagine that those thousands of Facebook followers and many more would be the first to say that you are a part of any success they've had. I got to tell you, I can't thank you enough for being here. I feel better somehow knowing that you're where you are and that there are many other people like you, around the world that are motivated and just dive in and take charge of helping kids at a variety of different age groups, but at yours, 14 to 18, get better and become leaders. Patrick, on behalf of all, thank you. Thank you very much. Suze, back to you.
Sam and Patrick, thank you so much for today's conversation. That was such a great hour, and we really appreciate your time and willingness to share your leadership lessons with us. To learn more about Patrick Stokes, Lessons from Leaders, or to review today's recording, please go to the Center for Leadership Studies LinkedIn company page. Thanks again, everyone.
This book will give you a wide array of really interesting, thoughtful, and practical ideas from some incredibly wise people.
It provides such a rich variety of leadership journeys from so many great leaders with different backgrounds, experiences, and areas of focus and service.
I think you're going to find this entertaining, it's going to be practical, and it's lessons from leaders that you can take back and use.
Pick up a copy of Lessons from Leaders.